Hello. Hi. My name is Mr. Henry, and I'm going to make a little recording for you over the New Deal or the beginning of the New Deal programs, which were President Franklin Roosevelt's programs to get our economy back going um, during the Great Depression days. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so where we left off. So people thought it was part of the boom bust cycle that would pass quickly. That means the stock market crashed, remember, in 1929, and we went into the Great Depression, which was one of the worst times in our history. A lot of people lost a lot of jobs. There was a really high unemployment rate. A lot of people out of work. A lot of people that were trying to just put food on the table to survive. So President Hoover, this guy right here in the cartoon, reacted with caution. He believed in laissez-faire, and that means a hands-off approach by the government, right? The government doesn't have to do much. The economy will right itself, okay? And this was just part of the everyday economic cycle, and the economy is going to get back without government intervention. This is what he thought. All right, so he called on churches, states, and local governments and private citizens to help those in need instead of the government giving money, and private organizations and charities would help people out, right? So he worked with businesses to make more credit available, get railroads and local governments to start projects to employ more people. He feared that government intervention would reduce the incentive to work and undermine rugged individualism. So he wanted, again, the government to stay out of the economy. This is laissez-faire. And he felt that the Great Depression would not last that long, and then we would be back to normal, right? But by this time, when he was president, over 100,000 businesses had failed, and 25% of the population was out of work, unemployed. All right, the election of 1932. So let's look at that. Election of 1932, Franklin Roosevelt was a Democrat, and then Herbert Hoover was a Republican. Franklin Roosevelt, the Democrat, won in a landslide. So if you look at this map right here, this political map, you can see all the green states. That means the Franklin Roosevelt won all of the green states. So he won in a landslide. Okay, very popular. People wanted change in this country. They wanted a new leader, a new president, because things weren't working very good with Herbert Hoover. So he pledged a new deal with the American people. President FDR or Roosevelt planned to fix the economy and the nation during the Great Depression. His inaugural address or speech was the only thing we have left to fear is just fear itself, right? We don't have anything else to fear but fear, right? The fear of fear. So here he is right here, Mr. Franklin Roosevelt. He was the longest serving president in United States history from 1933 to 1945. All right, so FDR in the Great Depression, his main ideas were how would FDR respond to the problems facing the United States? 25% unemployment. A lot of people didn't have jobs, didn't have enough food to eat. How would he respond to that? What are the reactions to the New Deal that he made? These government programs called the New Deal. And what is his legacy? So the Brain Trust. So FDR worked with a group of experts called the Brain Trust. Okay, and here's a picture of them right here, to create the New Deal programs. So these people were, some of them were professors, college professors, lawyers, journalists, and social workers. So they worked together to figure out what do we need to do to get our economy back going and get more people employed in this country. So they came up with the New Deal programs. So 3 goals of the New Deal. There are 3 R's or 3 parts of the New Deal programs. One of them is relief, the next one is recovery, and the third one is called reform. Okay, so relief just means immediate help, immediate relief for the needy, jobs for the unemployed, protection for farmers from foreclosure. So if you have a headache, you're going to need relief, right? Immediate relief within a matter of minutes or 20 minutes. So you take maybe something for your headache, like headache medicine, to help you get immediate relief, right? So a lot of people were out of work. They needed jobs. They needed money immediately. So this is the very first part of the New Deal program, the relief part, immediate help for the needy and jobs for the unemployed. Get them money in their pockets. Then the second part is called recovery. How do we get the economy moving again? How do we recover from the Great Depression? Okay, this was the second part of the New Deal. Then the third and final was called reform. This was the last part of the New Deal. Reform dealt with how do we regulate banks, abolish child labor, conserve farmland. So how are we going to make sure that we never go back into the Great Depression again? What kind of changes do we need to make in our society to make sure we never go back to the Great Depression ever again? This is the reform part of it. All right, and then we had the first 100 days. So every president tries to do certain things, tries to get a lot accomplished usually in the first 100 days that they take office, which is about the first 3 months or so. So at the beginning of his term as president, 1932, 1933, FDR moved very quickly to find ways to help end the Great Depression. He believed the government had a moral obligation to help families survive. Congress passed more than 15 major pieces of his New Deal legislation. So Congress was with him, and they wanted to also find a way out of the Great Depression. So they passed 15 pieces of his New Deal legislation, significantly expanded the federal government's role in the nation's economy. So the federal government became a lot more powerful and a lot larger because of these New Deal programs. Okay. Okay, relief. So again, relief is immediate, short-term relief, getting people through until economy starts to recover, right? So they came up with a bank holiday, closed all the banks, could not reopen until government inspectors declared the banks were sound and they could be reopened, because we were having a lot of problems with banks closing down and going bankrupt. Federal Emergency Relief Act, or FARA, was passed. The CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, and the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. Okay, so these were federal government programs to get people back to work. All right, basically the federal government paid usually young men money so they could build things that needed to be built, repair roads, repair dams, repair infrastructure, do things in national parks and national forests with the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. So they were putting people to work. The federal government was hiring and paying usually young men directly to get money in their pockets, okay, under the relief programs. Next, we come to recovery. So the National Recovery Administration asked businesses to voluntarily follow codes that set standard prices, production limits, and minimum wages. All right. So the NRA was passed, and also the AAA, the Agriculture Adjustment Act, was the first agriculture government program that paid farmers to plant fewer crops because basically not as many crops were needed. Farmers at the time were planting too many crops and they weren't able to sell them and they were losing money. So the second AAA government bought farm surpluses stored in warehouses until prices went up. So they were helping farmers and ranchers out because farmers were really hit hard by what was going on during the Great Depression. So that was part of the Recovery Act. How do we recover from the Depression and get back to a sense of normalcy? And then the final one is called reform. And again, the reform is the last part of the New Deal government programs that dealt with how do we stay out of, how do we not get into another Great Depression? Once our Great Depression ends, how do we make sure we never get into another one, right? Going to have to make some changes. So they came up with the FDIC, which is still around today. 1933, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. You can find FDIC in the bank. You walk into a bank, you should see it maybe on the counter of a bank. So it insured bank deposits so people would not lose their money if the bank failed or went bankrupt. You would get your money back that you put into the bank if the bank closed down. All right. Kind of a big deal. 1933, Tennessee Valley Authority was made. TVA built government-owned dams to control flooding, to bring electricity to poverty-stricken Tennessee River Valley, which was in the southern states, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. So again, they're putting people to work to build dams and infrastructure that is bringing electricity to people's houses that were poor. So 1934, the SEC was formed, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is still around today, regulates the stock market to prevent fraud and another stock market crash. All right, also very important. And in 1933, maybe the most important one, the Social Security Act, okay, which we still have Social Security today, gave workers unemployment insurance, pensions, and insurance to families if workers died early. All right, and finally, some of the major New Deal programs. We're going to look real quick at some of the ones that are still around today. So let's look in the relief part. We have the Social Security Act, which is still around today. Social Security, basically we can retire if we have Social Security. That is a government pension, basically, that is paid, that people pay into. Once they reach the age of 65, they can draw Social Security. Social Security also includes Medicare and Medicaid, which is government-funded insurance, okay, for people that can't afford insurance. All right, in the recovery session, let's look at the Tennessee Valley Authority, which also is still around today. So remember, the TVA was the program that employed a lot of people to build dams and other infrastructure that brought a lot of electricity and flood control to Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. And then under the reform part of it, we have the FDIC, we have the SEC, or Securities and Exchange Commission. So we have those two things that are still around today, 80 something years later, right? Or, well, I guess it's 80 years. Yeah, about 85 years later. So the FDIC insured our bank deposits, that we would get our money back if the bank closed down, which is always a good thing. Securities and Exchange Commission regulated the stock market. So we would not, there was a lot of fraud back then in stocks. So it regulated the stock market so the stock market won't crash again like it did in 1929. All right, thank you.